I mean, I've heard that fatigue is essentially an emotion, right? It's not
Mhm.
like a status of fuel going down and you're like, you are now fatigued and you have to stop. It's your body producing a signal saying, oh, we don't really need to spend resources on this. So I'm just going to give you the perception and feeling emotion of fatigue as a signal. But that's something you could play with. And a lot of it depends on the context of the task. So, like we were talking about, the difference between play and just running through the motions. Kids will play until they drop, right? But if you have them do something they don't want to do without meaning, or even like as punishment, they're going to feel very different
Yeah,
while doing it.
100%. If you're in the world of sports performance, you've probably heard of jump testing mats. These mats use hang time to measure total jump height or contact time to measure quickness abilities off of the ground. The best jump mat that I've come across also happens to be a sponsor of this show, which is the Plyomat. The Plyomat is not only accurate, easy to use, and affordable, but it also allows you to string multiple mats together to add an extra dynamic to plyometric testing and training. To check out the Plyomat, you can head to plyomat.net. That's plyomat.net. Today's podcast is also brought to you by the Team Builder training software. Whether you're taking your program paperless, collecting better data, or looking to provide a high-quality programming experience, Team Builder was built to fit any strength coach in any setting. Welcome back to another episode of the podcast, and I appreciate you being here. I'm excited to welcome back to the show trainer, lifter of heavy and varied objects, and philosopher of movement, DJ Murakami. I had DJ on the show recently within the past year, and I had a ton of questions that I didn't get to ask him for the last episode, so I'm excited to get him back on the show. And on the podcast today, he'll be going in depth on how we regulate our training from a mental, emotional, and social standpoint. He'll be going into the greater meanings and themes that drive human movement. He'll be talking about music selection and training, the story behind training, and more. And it's great to have DJ on the show. I really enjoy hearing his perspective. Let's get to episode 373. I know, we've talked a little bit before, I think, on our last podcast, and maybe this is a question I wasn't able to get into fully last time, but the idea of just running training as an epic quest, an epic story. I think that's even, I think you have a website for that, right? Like Strength Quest. And tell me a little bit more about that. I like the zombie apocalypse or some of the different quests and how that works out, how you're creating a story around training just for people who just want to get into strength in a different way. Tell me a little bit about how that works out.
Yeah, I think it's cool to look at, once again, training motivations. A lot of people want to gain skills. So if you just think about that in a gamified sort of way, you're on a quest and you want to unlock certain skills, achievements, upgrades. You want to level up, and that might be like the splits, is something. There's a population who really wants that. And I think it's less of like, oh, I want a certain capacity of my hips, or I want a certain, mobility in this joint. It's like, no, I want that skill to do so that I can, one, show it off, pull it out, even like a party trick. Like those things are big motivations. So yeah, if you think of training instead of, I guess, in the more functional way, like I'm trying to fix something, or, there's something I'm lacking and I need to be better. It's like, oh, what if I just have this list of quests I can go on, work towards them, and then you get the prize at the end through the effort, and that is the skill, or that is an upgrade in strength. So yeah, I like that view of fitness, of physicality, and I think it's just more fun, and you could do it a little bit more long term. If you just look at, you're just playing a game with your body, and there's unlimited side quests and main quests. And yeah, you're just always leveling up. And while you do so, you get to learn a lot about yourself. And hopefully you get to build some community along the way.
Yeah, we look at how addicted people are to video games, especially like a role-playing type game where part of the thing is. You leveled up. Oh, I'm this far away from leveling up. And it's very definitive, I think, in those games. It's very clear. You have a certain amount of, points or whatever you need, and you become the next level. I think sometimes and I think we treat it the same way in most gym type cultures. I mean, you're leveling up when you're in middle school or high school. It's just, hey, I put 10 more pounds on my bench. I leveled up, But it's like if it's only one thing, that you eventually hit the point of diminishing returns. It might get a little redundant. And that's one of the things that I really think is interesting about more of I guess you could say like a movement culture approach, like Ido Portal, and just like all these, it's almost infinite, all these different patterns that you can improve at. So, and the cool thing with that, I feel like too, is the more things you improve at, if I level up in 20 different human movement patterns, I have massively raised my physical level generally versus just sitting there and being like, oh, just got to bench more, even squat or deadlift. I mean, not that that's not great, but like, I just find it like the robustness in leveling up in all these different things adds up to a really big thing that's really powerful at the end of the day. So I think it's rewarding in multiple levels there.
Yeah, it reminds me of, you have your status bar with all your like qualities, strength, speed, mobility, and you could +1, +2 it. So yeah, you have all those qualities, and some people focus. Maybe it's like when you choose an RPG, your archetype player, like one's the brute and the other one's like the elf. So I think that is good. Like maybe sort of against the movement culture narrative. I think it's good to specialize. I think it's good to double, triple down. This is something my friend Bud Jeffries used to say, but like take your strengths and take them as far as you can, like, build up your weaknesses, but like you have those strengths for a reason. And it makes me think of if I did want to have a zombie apocalypse squad, I would not want a group of everyone being mediocre at everything. I would want a group of separate specialists in my squad, kind of like football. You have the quarterback, the lineman, they have different strengths. To me, that seems more effective when you're looking at a group social community level, is to have diversify and spread the resources and the talents. But yeah, it's cool because you have the option to take whatever path you want to do, level up in whatever way you can, and kind of build your own avatar and character in a sense. So there's no right or wrong.
Yeah, for sure. And maybe I should clarify a little bit what I was saying before, because I totally agree with you as well. And I'm definitely one I would agree with Bud Jeffries as well. Like whatever your strength is, that is your archetype, and you are that archetype. Like you can do some other things, but ultimately that's the big thing that feeds your engine. And I guess I think of it a little bit in the sense of maybe skills that are within the general realm of that archetype, maybe would be a better way that I had wanted to put it. And one of my own stories was, I remember this was back when I was in high school, and it was my senior year, and I just got on this like breakdancing kick. And it's funny because I think about like, what archetype am I? Like I was a high jumper, did like track jumps, but I also liked like breakdancing, like athletic stuff, like that kind of thing. And so just, I guess, very elastic, more movement oriented type. And I remember when I was getting into that, and then just in the scope of basketball season, we were doing a lot of like intense sprints and those types of things. And I had to take a break from weights for a while. But I remember I actually jumped my highest in like all of high school basketball coming off of that stuff. And it's like, because breakdancing, a little more upper body, lower body mobility, but still like spinal engine, just being athletic. Even stuff like doing the worm, for people who know what that move is. It's funny because I tried to start doing that again like last year, and I was so much worse at it than when I was in high school. And I just think of even like the spinal segmentation, working with the ground, like all this stuff that if you don't do it for 15 years, I'm like, wow, I can't believe how much I've lost. And so in so many ways, me getting back into some of these things, and even some of the Ido Portal stuff, like Marcelo Peloso, I probably butcher his last name. I know he was a Ido Portal student. A lot of like just like movement stuff that reminds me of like breakdancing. I don't exactly know what you'd call it, but even in getting into some of that more recently, I found like I'll throw javelin now, and just doing that, like my javelin gets better without having to work on javelin. It's all kind of related. It's all spinal mobility and spinal engine, but in a slightly different context. And then going back to the actual javelin, it's like, oh, this is way better. So that's more where I'm coming it from. I think obviously if I want to be really good at like running half marathons or something related to that, that probably wouldn't be so much in my wheelhouse. But I guess I just think about it more from the sake of related skills, finding, you could say maybe closely related side quests that you can level up in that are meaningful and rewarding along the way.
Yeah, I like that story. That makes me think like, hey, if you could take a group of people and work on spinal segmentation and spinal waves against facing a wall, and then take a people and just try to get them to learn the worm, which would have a better, more applicable outcome. You know, it reminds me of like, you'll see a lot of people in movement culture, they're like bouncing a tennis ball and hitting against a wall for 10 minutes. Like, what if you just boxed or played a ball sport with friends? You know, what would have a better carryover for overall athleticism? It goes back to kind of what I've seen with like the kids, like people making kids exercise and do like repetitive tasks when it's just so built in if they want to play or have a game. Yeah, I think it's a spectrum, but it's interesting where we have the delineation between what's can be in a gym in a program and what is kind of serious, definable, measurable capacity versus skill, if you want to put it like that.
Yeah, I think, with what you're saying too, it is something I've been thinking about a lot the last few years is basically anytime I watch any exercise, I'm always weighing it against the intensity of playing a sport, basically. Like, where does this fit from, like, is all systems, all cylinders, how does this compare to if I'm doing a change of direction exercise? How does this compare? And I'm just doing it, I don't know, in a turf somewhere and there's nobody else around and nothing's going on and I'm trying to like hit a cone a certain way. How does that compare to how I would do that if it was in a game and it's intense and I have other people I'm playing with and there's adrenaline and there's, all this stuff. And so, and you could take that to anything, a medicine ball, you're throwing a medicine ball and you're trying to get like a hip turn movement versus how does that compare if I'm playing dodgeball and I'm trying to run someone down and hit them with the ball, or something like that? How does it compare from that inner feeling? And part of that too, I think about that a lot in the sense that when I did track, when I was in even competitions versus just practice, like in javelin, I would throw 30 feet farther in a competition, even just warming up. I felt like my body was like ripping itself apart. Like something else was working inside of me that I didn't even know I had this. And so I always just look at training in that light too. How can I bring all these more meaningful, bigger elements into the training process and make the whole training more like this, just versus, and always kind of having that. And I think that's something coaches, you can only understand through competing, too, or through doing some of those bigger movements and always taking that feeling with you of how engaged was I to do this big thing. And then you weigh all the little stuff, at least to a degree, with that in mind.
Well, so you're coaching soccer, and this is something I've noticed with little kids is like, or kids in general. If you tell them to, like we've seen this with speed ladders, the agility ladders. Okay, someone could be really good and specialize at the agility ladder. They might not be able to run a route. That might, I think I saw a study where it might impede them a little bit when they go to run a route in the real sport, because there's not much carryover, right? Less complexity. You're not dealing with another human being. You just learned a coordination.
Yeah, just all short steps too, not bigger,
short steps,
more complex
right?
Steps.
Very, very different. And then, but even if you take that down to like kids playing tag versus kids just, all right, we're going to run a lap or do gassers. They not only don't do the efforts, you're not getting what you want out of it as far as intensity, but they move very differently. Like I live right behind me is a middle school. So I could see like the blacktop, them at recess, and that's where they do PE. But you'll see kids automatically when the bell rings, they run out, right? So they're running out, they're running towards something, they're looking, they're reacting. And then you could see when they have to do the mile or like run to the fence and back, they just change. Like it's a weird posture and like, and they're not looking to go anywhere. They're just trying to think as they're getting through it. So it always interests me that the intensity is one obvious factor that changes there, but also they move completely differently when there's an actual task to complete, meaning behind the movement, and then just moving to move with no real manipulation or goal in their immediate environment. And it's very interesting. I don't know what that is that causes them to, it might be, I guess when you go to pick something up off the ground and then when you go to lift a weight, maybe they're switching a mode to like, okay, I don't need to do this efficiently or going for speed. I'm just going to kind of preserve my energy, and maybe that causes them to execute the activity a little differently. But yeah, I'd like to see that spectrum measured even in exercise. Like if there were a task and real motivation behind what you're doing, like you said in sport, when you're competing, you a different kind of part of you took over, right? And I think there's something about danger and consequence that we're missing
Yes.
from exercise. And that goes with competition, because another human being you're competing against is dangerous.
Yeah.
Right. And there's more consequence, especially social consequence, status, ego, these things. So yeah, it's interesting.
Yeah. And working with high jump was an event I coached a lot, and you would see that a lot as well, where and I would say even more so than something like sprinting. I don't know why this was in some of these, maybe more, I would say like high jump and javelin are a little bit more complex and a little bit less innate than sprinting. And I would see like athletes who could barely jump, let's just say 6 feet 4 inches in practice. And then we go to the meet on the weekend and they'd be jumping 6'8" or 6'9". And it was like, and not everyone was like that. I was always like that. And so it's interesting because like with javelin, as I got a little bit older, it was starting to pay attention to what is my body doing? like I want to do this, like whatever my body is doing now, I'm going to start trying to think about this in practice. And I've heard this before, this idea that your technique or what your body does. I think we think of coaching as like, hey, let's tell an athlete these 3 things, and then they're going to do those 3 things, and that will make their technique, whatever you want it to be. But at the end of the day, if you zoom out, you start to look at, well, your technique is kind of the resultant of a lot of bigger factors: your culture, community, situations, things that drive you to a higher level. Because if it drove your muscle output to a higher level, your technique has to now encapsulate and take that on too. And so it's like it's almost 2 completely different situations in some respect. And so, yeah, you think about, well, how am I just creating situations that can really get the fullness of this going? I do want to ask you, actually, with that in mind, one of the questions I had was and I see you doing this a lot, is like very physical, a lot of physicality in your training sessions. Like if it's like a corrective, you're resisting it manually, you're perturbing it, or athletes or individuals or clients are learning some movements, and you're even climbing on their back, or like a lot of physical interaction to drive things forward. And so tell me a little bit more about your approach on physicality, or bringing physicality into the training session, like manually resisting, offering kind of that human level element in the scope of the training session.
Yeah, it's kind of what we were talking about, especially with correctives and unloaded activities. People kind of just go through the motions. I'm not sure they are really honed in on what they're supposed to feel, where they're supposed to be shifting their weight, what they're supposed to be doing. They're just kind of mimicking a movement. So I think just giving feedback, I like to use my hands a lot on people, giving them the feedback. So they're like, okay, now let's say my posterior hip is loaded up. I feel it. Now I know what I need to squeeze to get in and out of that. And now you're also getting, just like with load, a kind of a loaded eccentric, more of a stretch, but you have something to fight against. It's just better feedback. So people have a clear feeling of what they're supposed to be doing. So it's just yeah, I don't think they have enough resistance, especially strong people, big people, adults. When you do a lot of corrective mobility, these kind of uh, drills that you don't typically load up, they don't respond to it very well. I feel like people need load to inform the movement itself. They need that feedback. So yeah, I like to use hands on a lot of them because the hip structure, especially, is hard to load. We have our hands uh, to pick up weights. We have our feet to push against things. We have our jaw even, but the hip structure, it's really hard to place a load on there without it falling off. So a hand is a perfect thing to put directional load where you want it, with a little rotation. Um, and that's been money for people, especially for hinging, especially for, kind of scissoring, getting in and out of the hip. It just makes it so clear. You could, talk to your blue in the face about biomechanics and what the joint is supposed to be doing and the femur and the acetabulum. But if you just give them the tactile input, bang, it's there and they don't have to think about it. So it's just I found it a practical tool that works.
Yeah, for some of the rehab stuff too, I saw you doing one with like it was like a dead bug, but you're like kind of moving around, like almost like perturbing the individual in the dead bug, things like that. I did want to mention too. I one when you were talking, I was thinking about, and as relates to what we were chatting about before, like even before you said it, what popped in my head was there's generating some fight. Like I think that's the Julian Pineau thing with the phylogenetic wheel. Like there's the stages, the emotional stages you go through as you go through a workout. Maybe it's, or like a tough workout. Like first maybe you're in flow for a little bit. I'm feeling good. And then it starts getting really hard. And then it's like, oh, now I'm in this fight mode a little bit more. And I think that, yeah, it is interesting because you would think about like something like rehab, for example. It's like, hey, I got to fight to get better. You probably would hear like something like that term, or you should want to fight to get better, but yet there's not much to fight against in a lot of situations potentially. And so I guess that I think if you have manual resistance, maybe that brings out that emotion as well, or can help assist with that. I'm curious what you think about that.
Yeah, I would say it's going more toward a flow when you're just dazed out doing a boring drill that you're not really feeling anything with, right? And it's like, okay, oh, now I'm reacting to you and I'm bypassing the thinking, mind, and I'm just into it. And I think, that you get out of your head, you get stuff moving. And yeah, even a fight, I mean, even with some of these drills, there's people who say, hey, the point of this drill is um to create a more parasympathetic state, blah blah blah, something. But you know even if you get stronger at a movement, it makes sense to me that you now can be more parasympathetic with a lighter load because you're more competent and your tissue
Hmm.
is more resilient and you could produce more force, which in itself makes you feel safer that you have that ability. And once again, I think especially for kind of stronger people, adults, that's what they need. And yeah, I mean, you scale it. So I even like using that free dumbbell. Before I use a dumbbell, I like to use my hands for people to press because then I can kind of guide where I want the angle to be. I can kind of let up resistance at certain parts of the movement, kind of like a band or a chain might do. But you as a person are so much smarter and can toggle that intensity where you want it, rep by rep, inch by inch, where you want it, depending on the person. So yeah, yeah, I think it's something about the interaction with another person trying to uh, find your weakness or test it. You're going to push back. It's like RNT philosophy, right? You're gonna instinctually, naturally fight against someone trying to push you over.
I wanted to take a quick minute to tell you about my story with our sponsor, Lost Empire Herbs. Several years ago, I had strongman and mental training expert Logan Christopher on the show, and in the interview, I realized that Logan, in addition to deadlifting over 500 pounds and ripping phone books in half, also was the founder of an herbalism company. Long story short, I ended up ordering the Phoenix formula, one of their flagship products, and in taking that, I noticed increased energy and a decreased reliance on coffee, which honestly, I was kind of expecting that. But what I didn't expect is after a few weeks, I noticed my weight room numbers had increased substantially. And the Phoenix formula also led me to getting Shilajit resin, which is found in the Phoenix formula and recommended by a lot of strength coaches, as well as other Lost Empire Herbs products. I've been using Lost Empire Herbs ever since, and I have sponsors of the show that I believe in, that I use, and that I want to share with you. So if you want to check them out, head to lostempireherbs.com/justfly for 15% off my favorite Lost Empire Herbs products. You get a 365-day money-back guarantee. I really enjoy having Lost Empire Herbs as a sponsor of this show, and I hope you get a chance to check out what they have to offer. Let's get back to the podcast. Yeah, so what kind of led you into more of that physicality in both training and correctives? Because I'd imagine you probably started from a place that a lot of people start, like going through the different certifications and probably, trial and error, trying some, more, you could say like the flow state kind of stuff where maybe that, I don't know if that term's, at least in context, stuff where you're just doing something and you're not necessarily being challenged by it. Like, tell me a little bit more about the path that you took to get to where you are now, where you are like doing more active. Things are more active, things are more physical. Like you have that tactile feedback of the client's like muscular output and potential and things like that. What was your path to getting there, or some major things that happened that got you more in that mindset of where you are now?
Yeah, I've kind of always done it, but they were compartmentalized, and I didn't really see it as a principle-based approach early on. I mean, if you look at like Mulligan techniques in physical therapy, like they're tractioning with their body, they're using a strap, they're pulling. Even Kelly Starrett, if you remember, he used to say like, grab a super friend to I remember step that on the band or sit on yours, and that was more like stepping on you for massage, but it was like using another person. And even the Ido stuff, a lot of it was our fighting monkey, a lot of it is like partner based. You yourself are the tool. But yeah, I didn't put together that, it's just load. It's just like using a implement barbell, load and resistance. And a lot of them I would use because I didn't have machines in our gym. So I would kind of use myself to set people up and become here's a little slant board to put your feet, go back on the TRX, and I'm going to push down your shoulders like a pad would on a hack squat. Like you could kind of use yourself to create all the constraints that are out there in machines. And you could even, move the scale on that spectrum, because we kind of think like, all right, like high skill, low stability, like a barbell back squat. And then there's people like, no, we need to use the most efficient like pendulum squat machine, and everyone's going from one extreme to the other. But it's like, man, you have the ability to just take people and place them anywhere, depending on the individual, just by either using some external constraints or especially using your hands and your body to block and provide stability. So yeah, I kind of seen a lot of people have used their hands, especially therapists and other people. But yeah, now I'm just seeing it as, hey, you are just providing load and resistance in a more targeted fashion with a lot more intent.
Yeah, it reminds me a little bit of, this was all the way back, almost 20 years ago now. I had watched, I think it was for one of my college university classes, or maybe something else, but it was a Juan Carlos Santana, like, I think it was like training wrestlers or something like that, but it was basically no barbell strength training. And it was all, you have a buddy and you carry your buddy across the wrestling mat. They carry you. You could do like lunges with your partner. You could do all sorts of things. And I remember after watching that, I just remember, and these people were all very strong. I mean, they probably had done clearly some barbell or level of barbell and dumbbell lifting, but you just watch that type of thing with just human driven resistance. And you're like, wow, you can really do a lot. And then there's something to the human dynamic as well. And this is maybe a slightly different direction, but I was just thinking about, and I'll actually be going to this movement retreat here led by Aaron Cantor. He's one of the Evolve Move Play coaches that at Rafe Kelly's seminars. And he was talking about a game where basically you, like, the game is just lift your partner up. And every time you as the partner try to make yourself harder to lift. So you're like manually making it harder for the other person. So I was just kind of thinking if you could even like be like, hey, you got to carry this other person, but they're going to make it hard for you somehow, or they're going to make it more difficult. And but even within all that too, and as you were talking, I was just thinking about, so many modalities that exist in massage therapy or PT or anything like that. Sometimes, I've wondered how much of this is the exact technique versus just having another human contact interaction, and like just adding that human kind of contact element into physical training itself. I think, it's just like a really cool add-on, and just being able to figure out ways to implement that and use it, I think is always a plus. So, I mean, I'm just thinking in generalities, like I would have athletes, we would warm up at Cal, like I would just have athletes carry each other, especially if it was like a more like water polo, more contact sport, warm up with carrying the other person, sometimes like doing stuff like lunging or things like that. I feel like I probably could have got more creative with it, but I haven't gotten so far down the providing physical resistance into movements. I would like to actually go into that just a little bit more, like the hinge, for example, like teaching the hinge. Like how would you tell me a little bit more about how you go into you using your own body weight and manually helping someone learn some of these key or resist some of these key movements?
Yeah, I love that you brought that up, because that is talking about the hinge. It was inspired by like martial arts. If you look at judo, I mean, it's kind of the classic hip toss, is where they're carrying weight through their hip. And acro yoga, if you look at acro yoga, if you're the flyer, you get on top of the base and their legs are straight out. That's one of the best hamstring stretches you could do, because you're having to balance this person and push into it. And I was kind of like, hey, if you flip that over, feet on the ground, and then put the person on the hips and have them balance through the floor, that's really mimicking the hinge. And one of the hardest parts of the hinge, I think, is like the weight shift on the feet. A lot of people, you get kind of sketched out because of the balance factor. But if you hang yourself on someone's hip, they can literally put all their weight forward and not fall because you're counterbalancing them. And they could really pull their hips up, get deep. And it's always like deeper than anyone can go, because they have that weight balancing them. And they know, okay, now I'm pushing through my hips actively. But yeah, that's it. Once again, in martial arts, I mean, that is jujitsu essentially. If you're looking at joint isolated movements, you're literally trying to break people's joints. And that is just so happens black belt, Dr. Dre, Spina. I think that's the influence behind something like FRC. And if you go back far enough, all resistance was, apart from carrying stones and stuff, a lot of it was resistance with other people, wrestling and martial arts. Martin Rooney even had a book. You remember Martin Rooney?
Yeah.
Training for Warriors?
I do, yeah.
He had a book. What was it? But it was all partner training drills with another person. A lot of it was kind of wrestling inspired, grappling inspired. But yeah, that stuff is powerful, and it'll get you in shape. It's second to, I think, if you got a partner like that and a sandbag, man, you could get a lot done just with those two.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think about everything you get done just on the field of play, just by chasing other people around and being explosive, using other people to help motivate your movement strategy on the field, and then off the field, you can do the same thing. And Yeah, I think you can definitely get, it's almost as if we should have in exercise curriculums, have a section on human training, manual resistance techniques, where before, because everything, it's almost like we do everything but that. And I've heard, it might have been like Rick Rubin who said something like this, where an artist shows you non-verbally or through what you already know to be true. Something like that, where it's like, and you see some of this training and it's like, this to be true. Like, this is athletic. It's going to get you strong. This works on principles, some of those greater overarching principles.
It kind of goes back to the idea that one thing lacking is we need more consequence and danger in our tasks. And I don't know. I think there's just too much liability as far as educational institutions teaching that, because
I agree.
You got to safety first. What was the safest thing we could do? Safest entry for all populations, and it's going to be probably a machine or the TheraBands. But yeah, for people who I train coaching more of an art at a human level, then there's a whole world there as far as applying resistance with your own body.
Yeah. One of the questions I was actually going to ask you, I'm glad you brought that up, was, I think you might have said your dad or a coach said this to you at some point, but it was like it's the scared player who gets hurt. And I think that's just, isn't it so interesting? Like, we have an industry or a huge part of the industry that's so devoted to injury prevention and reduction, but it's all, and not that, I think it's, with the actual injury numbers, some people would say we have more than ever. I've looked through, I think Jan Ekstrand has actually said in like Premier League soccer, there's less. So there's clear there is something being done there that's helpful. Maybe it depends on the population a little bit, but I think it's undoubtable that we're really only taking, I think, one major approach to it, which is mostly data-based. It's on the more quantifiable end. But if you look at, I even just, again, playing youth soccer, you watch kids, just their general tendencies, and like, how tentative or timid are they? How good are they at falling? Can they fall and get back up again? And it's interesting to see that. I know Austin Yoakum as well, I know you're on his podcast, has talked about in football, like the ability to fall and land well in a falling situation, not in a controlled, not like your feet are hitting the ground to snap down, but to be able to fall and roll, to fall and mitigate, which does there's instant discomfort there too. This isn't like a safe drill. You're literally getting dumped onto your back somehow, and you have to find how to roll out of it. But I'd be curious for you to expand a little bit on that phrase or that topic, and how you approach that line in your training, right? Because there is like that, I guess, safe-ish container of training that exists. But then how do you work that mentality in light of that container?
I don't know the root of that. I've been thinking about that. I think it goes back to what we were talking about. You have kids running just to run a lap, and you have them running to chase someone. They're going to execute that movement completely different. And I think from an emotional level, when you have doubt and fear going into a movement, it completely changes how you execute the movement. And I think it becomes a more dangerous movement. Yeah, when my dad said that, it was me like guarding and covering myself up before I was about to get hit. And the other person would hit me. I didn't run through the person. So I thought I was protecting myself, but I was actually getting wrecked a lot more. And, looking back to times I've hurt myself lifting, many of those times I remember being very, there was doubt before the lift, like something was off in my head. I remember before one time someone said, some guy was like, worked at the gym, was like, stop making noise with the weights. And I just got pissed off. And I went into like, okay, I'll go to my lift. And I hurt myself like, because I was not very grounded, that something got me out of my center. And yeah, when people are scared, I think I talked about this last time we spoke, but even just if you're going into a movement and thinking, oh, if I move this way, it is bad for me. If you have a nocebo going into a movement, that is going to completely change how you execute the movement, how you feel the movement, how you relate to the movement, and even just the fact if you can do the movement, right? If you put it in a different context, someone could easily do the movement. But if I talked about the lady who picked up the sandbag and was pressing it, she picked it off the ground, pressing, and then when I told her, all right, we're just going to deadlift it and not press it, she said she tried to pick it up and said, I can't, my back hurts, even though she was previously picking it up to press it overhead because it was a different word, deadlift, whatever, that she had a history with, a negative history. And then there's all these, oh, I have to lift it like this and I have to do that. So, pain is psychosomatic, social. So I really think there's something there on the emotional, psychological level relating to performance and pain going into a lift. And have you heard of IFS therapy?
Internal family systems?
Yeah.
Yeah, a little bit.
So they did a study published where they had a group of people with rheumatoid arthritis, which is progressive, right? You can't really cure that. So a lot of people, so they all had that in the study, and they gave them IFS protocol where they were relating to their pain or whatever body part and creating a relationship with it, talking to it, going through that whole system of listening. Like, what are you trying to tell me? Like, I'm here for you. You're not a bad thing. And they were processing some stuff. I don't want to say majority, but there was a good percentage of that group that actually went into remission of their symptoms.
Interesting.
And so I started playing around with that before lifts. If there's a lift where I was like, oh, I don't know, this is a heavy weight, I would, or like something's bothering me, bugging me, I would just kind of start to open up communication with it. And I would talk to it and I would, it changed the experience of the lift. And the numbers went up, the ease went up, the perceived effort went down. And now on lifts like that can be a little heady, like a snatch, something where it's like you have to commit and pull. There's no thinking, And they talk about this in archery and shooting. Like you have to go through this mental routine before pulling the trigger, or else you're just expecting that recoil, and you're always going to be off the aim. So I'll go into some of these lifts and I'll bring people with me, like not just parts of me, like in the IFS, but like I don't know, like my dad, like my kid, and it's amazing how that changes the lift, the experience, and the load you can do, the performance. See, I've been playing that with a few people actually who are familiar with IFS, and the results are interesting. I'm thinking I want to get a large group to play around with this stuff, but it's going back to emotional valence. Are you on the negative side of emotion, fear, doubt, or are you on a positive side, love? Because if you look at for 20 plus years of my life, I've been training, competing with anger primarily. And I think many men do this. If you're on a treadmill, look at the music we choose. A lot of it is hardcore rap, rock, metal, like it's very combative. You're going back to the enemy, which is what we're talking about. Like, all right, I'm going to look at the movies you look up to pump you up. They're very competitive, fighting someone. But that's very taxing physiologically to go to that emotion constantly. And I think you could actually use this as a meditative psychological, emotional practice to go into some of these high arousal states, such as heavy lifting or high rep sets, with a more positive emotion, which is super hard. That was one of the hardest things for me to do. But I've actually seen change and carry over to the rest of my life, rest of my day, after practicing that kind of shift in mindset over and over. So like I said, I'm just speculating, but there's something about emotion and movement.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of links there. There's a few notes I had in my head on what you were just saying. The music one's really interesting. I think we had talked about this maybe before we actually recorded our last podcast. Is I remember talking to you a little bit about like what music I listened to or something, or you asked me, and because I used to listen to a lot more of that. You should have seen my playlist when I was like 27, my lifting playlist. I should dig it up if I could find the old little iPod that it was on. But it's almost all like kind of EDM, 90s, like dance type stuff and that kind of thing. At least that's the kick I've been on more so. And it's a lot more sustainable. And I don't know, for some reason, I will occasionally, like there maybe once a month or once every 2 months, I'll put on something that's a little bit heavier for lifting, but it is rare. But I don't know. And there was nothing that was really substantial that got me away from that. I think maybe it just got a little old. Like, I don't know, like maybe I think what got it actually, I think what might have changed it is I actually just started listening to more EDM stuff and just found it was easier to sustain and be in a flow state in the workout doing that. And then I'm like, well, I could do this for heavy lifting too. Like, that's okay. And yeah, for some reason it just kind of worked its way up. But I do think like that it's almost like in some ways our training session is our interface with our shadow a little bit. And we'll put on like the thing that, that you wouldn't really go to in normal life, but it's like lifting, you can, I guess, experience it a little bit, or you put on the angry stuff, or it is interesting to think about that. You have my wheels turning with that, with the music and the workout selection. I'm sure that could be a whole podcast in and of itself, just about.
Yeah. Even Julian Pinal, he had something where he was talking about going for a walk, for whatever, 15 minutes. And he's like, watch your thoughts and don't go to a dark place. Like, don't go to a fight. Like, think happy thoughts. I couldn't do that. Like, it would always go, especially when I'm like in the flow, going and breathing, I would go to like ruminate about a bad event, like where, I would have to fight someone or save people or something. And then Brian McKenzie also, he has this drill where you go on a bike and you're kind of reaching this zone and you're trying to maintain nasal breathing. And when you go to this place where you're scared, and it's like, I want to breathe, I want to get out of here. Like, watch your thoughts, watch your emotions. It's very interesting what pops up. It's like a very predictable pattern of thoughts, and if they're positive or negative, where they go. And I think that is something that we just do unconsciously on repeat. Like, we've trained ourselves to think a lot. And I think we do that, or at least I did that through training. I would use a lot of, like I said, negativity, fear, insecurity, anger, which was very helpful and useful. But like you said, I'm at an age now where I don't know how much I can keep that up. I think it's draining me more than aiding me now. So I do think it's something you can intentionally train and change, these kind of thought patterns that are related to physiological, energetic states of the body.
Yeah, it makes me think about, I guess, the archetypes or stages of life. Isn't it something like you're in the warrior stage and then you move towards like the king stage or something like that? Maybe it just has to do more with the warrior stage too. I don't know.
That sounds a lot cooler. We're in the king stage.
Yeah. I forget I think some of that came out of that book. It was like the 4 archetypes. It's like warrior, magician, lover, and then king or something like that. I forget who wrote that, but You know,
Was that Carl Jung?
uh, I'm sure he probably talked about it. It was no, it was somebody else though. Now I'm annoyed that I can't
I know
remember.
the book you're talking about. I forget. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, it's on my bookshelf upstairs. Old down here is all the training books. They don't have the I don't have the archetypes and the Carl Jung type books down here, sadly. But I'll have to go check after the conversation here. I was gonna
But
say,
it makes sense in that warrior phase. Think of teens, boys, they're maximizing testosterone. They are primed to go fight. They're primed not to think about consequences down the road and be impulsive and be angry and get together. They're driven away from mothers, caretakers, and they go with the boys. That is who they listen to more than family at that age. So it's almost built into them to, all right, go off to the gang and go fight the outsiders. And then you have, like you said, the king. After that, they're like, okay, now I need to be more strategic, more rational, and make decisions less off those type of emotions in the heat of the moment. As testosterone starting to come down, you have a fully formed prefrontal cortex, or maybe you have kids and then your brain and body change a little bit more. But yeah, I've been thinking about that too. It's nice to have lower testosterone. Everyone wants to maximize testosterone. I think there's something very nice about bringing it down in older age. It's really, I think you're more productive, to be honest.
it is interesting, yeah, with the waves of things, and then even I honestly I look back, maybe the impetus for me was having my first child being born. Like that might have been a big piece of that too. Honestly, I should go back and look at my Spotify and see it changed 7 years ago. You know, one thing you were saying too, DJ, you got me thinking about, I guess, just like, there's the link between the mind and like an exercise like deadlift. But I also think about, and you mentioned this, like, or just talking about why do we quit in an exercise? Like if you're just doing like a lunge hold or a horse stance or something for time, I think it's an interesting practice to do that and to go as long as you can. But then instead of just being like, oh, it hurts, I quit, which that's probably the most common thing, is actually like asking yourself, why am I quitting? Like what emotions are coming up that might actually be possibly creating more pain than actually it is. You know what I'm saying? And what happens if I just let myself like drop further into this stance instead of like going the other way? Or I've even thought too about, you could say the same thing with breath holds. I think that's pretty common, is using a breath hold as a medium for like, why am I choosing not to do, why am I choosing to take a breath of air, at least right now when my blood oxygen is probably perfectly fine for the next, 30 seconds or minute. But I've even looked at like a single arm push-up type thing. Sometimes I'll ask myself, why am I not going down further? Well, it's because I'm afraid, I guess, of failing and not making it back up. But then you go down to the point where you're probably going to fail, maybe not. But then you kind of look at what your body is doing to try to get you out of that and just kind of going into that space. So I was just trying to relate a little bit to what you were talking about before, with like pain or discomfort or going into the rep or things like that. Have you ever done anything with like muscle endurance, like failure type situations that, that you've kind of learned that part of your psyche or expanded that part of your psyche with?
Yeah. So part of that IFS emotional stuff was done with high reps. So high rep isolation work, just going to the burn. And man, you could get I mean, everyone thinks they know their RIR, RP, but you can get, man, 10, 15 plus more reps just from that change in mindset. And weird stuff will happen. So I mean, I've heard that, fatigue is essentially an emotion, right? It's not like a status of fuel going down and you're like, you are now fatigued and you have to stop. It's your body producing a signal saying, oh, we don't really need to spend resources on this. So I'm just going to give you the perception and feeling emotion of fatigue. as a signal. But that's something you could play with. And a lot of it depends on the context of the task. So like we were talking about, the difference between play and just running through the motions. Kids will play until they drop, right? But if you have them do something they don't want to do without meaning, or even like as punishment, they're going to feel very different while doing
100%.
it. When you're talking about holding the horse stance, I went to a workshop where they had you hold the horse stance and you're burning and they're like, now picture someone you love and do it for them. And then you actually can do it longer because you're doing it for, like, okay. Now, this is going back to some of the stuff on the walks I would go to, like, oh, I have to do this to save. Like, you could find reasons to keep doing things, even if you're making them up in your head. But going back to that high rep set, there's a point where you have the signal to stop fatigue, but then you're like, no, it's okay. And even the signal, like, it's okay. I'm going to keep going. I'm okay. And you'll keep going. And then you're almost observing all these signals and feelings coming up in the body. And as long as you could not let them take over and you just non-judgmentally keep watching them and going, man, I'll start to like giggle or get to that, or it's like on the verge of giggle and cry type of feeling. You know what I mean? And it's very weird, like butterflies in your stomach come up. Yeah, I've seen that with some breath work, pelvic floor sort of stuff. People will have these big emotional releases, and they all seem to be related with a giving in to an experience, and not fighting or going away from it, which is maybe you're bringing up something where their go-to is, okay, I'm going away from this. And it's a chance to create the same physical sensation, but now you are letting it happen and watching and processing whatever might be there. So yeah, we're getting a little wooey, but I think there's a lot of woo to play around with in these kind of things.
Yeah, especially once you get into a place where like the external environment doesn't mask over pain or whatever. And even, what you're saying about love, like from what I've heard of like Jay Schrader, who's very well known for these long isometric holds and all this stuff, but his athletes get very, very strong, is that he had talked about the pipes, like, is your training stimulating you on the like physiological, intellectual, psychological, emotional, and spiritual or spirit perspective. So it's like you have to check off the pipes first. And I think from my understanding, I think this was Alex Lee who had mentioned this, who was on this podcast a while back, with like the highest emotion was, like you said, it was love. Like that's the highest thing. And like you were saying, that could help you hold longer. But I think we usually go on autopilot, right? Like even if, like, it was kind of interesting. Last year, I used to rock climb in Boulder all the time when I was in my early 30s. Like I was totally addicted. It was kind of a great place because I had gotten this place where my track marks, my high jump, in my early 30s, my high jump isn't getting better. And so here's this new thing that I can level up at. And so I took a break when my kids were born, and for the first few years of their life, but I just went back last year and got on the wall again. And what blew me away was like the forearm pump that I had. Like if you just said, hey, Joel, just go hang, like I have a set of rock rings here, like near my desk. If you just told me to hang on that for 5 sets of a minute, I would get a good pump, but it wouldn't be anything close to what I got on the wall, because like the challenge, the meaning, like the thought of, what if I fall off the wall? Like all this stuff is taking me to a higher level. But at the same time, if I'm going to go hang from these rock rings, I don't have any of that. And now it's just me and my mind and my emotions and all my little programs on the inside. And now I'm stuck with it. And so, I just think that it is interesting because that's the space where now you took everything masking, your inner program away, kind of potentially. And I mean, you'll see it in sport too, but that being said, I actually am curious to ask you, what's your thoughts on, and I know you work more in the scope of like one-on-ones and clients in the personal training space versus like conditioning a football team, but what's your thought on like the mental toughness thing? Like, we're going to make you mentally tough and go do all these wind sprints or whatever is the typical thing. Like, do you have any insight in that? Like if you were training the football team and you were trying to bring this thought into process without making it confusing? Or, I mean, do you have any thoughts on that, or where that could be a good or bad thing? I mean, I think usually it's over conditioning and there's no mindfulness at all. And it's just, making people throw up or whatever, and they hate it. But I'm curious if you have any thought of how to make that better. How could we mindfully help improve this possibly?
Hey, I think there's something to be said for brief periods of over conditioning, just for the psychological, mental toughness, like you said. But I think, to milk that out, just using manipulating people through competition and through social punishment, reward, it's effective. Like if you could take kids and say, like I'm thinking back to football, the kid walking, everyone would run because he walked. And then, if you want to get really mean, that person has to stay there and watch everyone else run. And then they are not going to do it again. They're going to produce the effort just because of social consequence. So I think, that mental toughness, I think more or creating discipline or creating effort. The social side is a huge thing to draw upon to get people collectively to do something like that. But it's just, how do you get the motivation for someone to produce effort? And I think play is a great one. Social consequence to form discipline is a great one. I don't think, I think those two right there, more than a moral, like, it's the right thing to do. Like, you're not going to convince someone. You just have to put in the right constraints, the right carrot and stick, and whip people in. I think going back to that military mindset, people crave that. I do nowadays. If I got someone telling me what to do and I don't have to think, there's something so nice about that, so I think the mental toughness is a part, but when you're going into training for yourself, maybe at a later age, then I think you can go a little deeper, and it's less numbing. I mean, that's the thing. I think you're right about the life stages. There's a part where you're like, shut up and do it. And then there's a part where it's like, hold on, let's look what's here. And let's dig deeper. Going back to that IFS sets. There's been moments where I've like cried after a set. It's because it allows you to introduce, once again, give in an acceptance of thoughts and expressions while under a high arousal, high stress environment, which which is missing in a lot of like, okay, like here's your affirmations or here's some talk therapy on a couch. If you could bring that to like an embodied physical, high energetic situation, I think you can move a lot of stuff. But it's not a good answer. I think the mental toughness part is definitely something great for the youth and for people. And then you have the other side of the coin where it's maybe don't be so hard on yourself.
So, what you're saying, like one thing I was thinking about was when you're younger, like just keeping things more task social oriented, like looking at the greater overarching things, play, being a good teammate, like revolving the work around that more so than like, hey, it's the end of practice, we're just going to run these, 10 times the field so you can be tough or something like that. There's got to be there's got to be some greater overarching pieces to it. But I think about, like what you said, if you're younger and you're like trying to keep things just more task oriented, having the football team do horse stance for 5 minutes and saying, now I want you to go into your internal thought process and dig out, like that would probably work better for somebody who's in their 30s or 40s. They've been through all the warrior stage. They've done it. And now maybe finding ways to be more mindful about your motor programs. And maybe that's a better long term process with the whole thing, perhaps. Then, because I think for me, I tend to, I mean, I still make my high school athletes I train do ISOs, but I don't really wring it out of them. I'm not like, all right, we're going to do this till you fail and tell me about your emotions and things like that. But I think that there is value there once you're ready for it, once you are ready to assimilate those rewards.
I think you nailed it. Yeah. I mean, if you look at young kids, it's maybe competition, and then maybe social consequence. Because if you I don't think they have the hardware or imagine a young kid with the emotional intelligence to actually like
do
express the perspective to think, oh yeah, the love for my family, and they're not always going to be whatever. Like, yeah, I just don't think that's functional for that age. But yeah, when you get to different life phases, okay, now this, how it is now that you have a kid, like your priorities and your meaning are completely different as far as what motivates you at this stage. And I think just exploiting those different motivations at different age levels is something I think we do. I think we find out what works for kids and what works for adults more, even in the market. So yeah, I think that's a good thing to take that into consideration. What phase of life are they in?
Yeah, I think it's important, especially too. I've had a few podcasts on this show, but just like even just training youth, like kids who are like 6 to 10, because a lot of times coaches will treat them as if they're like 16 and they're not, not physically and not mentally, emotionally. The way you train them is different. The way you train a middle schooler is different, a high schooler, someone in their 20s or 30s. And it's cool because a lot of times people talk, and thankfully, about the difference between a 6-year-old, a 10-year-old, a 14-year-old, an 18-year-old in the scope of physical training and long-term development. But we don't really talk about what do you do when your high school and college days are done? Finding meaning, approaching training from a different perspective. I think a lot of times we just go back to the things we liked when we did, which is cool. But I just think there's always a lot more there, and just to have thoughts and perspectives on that, I think is really valuable.
Yeah, definitely. So what age are you coaching right now for soccer?
Oh yeah, just 5 and 6. That's been my daughter kind of graduated from me coaching her. She's 7 and is with a different my former assistant coach. So I took on working with my son. But it's fun working with like the 5 and 6-year-olds because it's just like I love seeing that perspective on what really makes these kids tick and what fires them up. And then I work within in the gym like kids who are ages 12 to 22 or 25. And so I have that age. And then online, I don't have so many of these in person, but online I have a lot older clients. And so it's just cool to like really make sure I'm hitting all these perspectives. And even back to what we were talking about before, I did want to mention this with like what stimulates you to run and move fast is with the 5 and 6-year-olds. To do that, we play like freeze tag first, because as soon as you roll out the soccer ball, everything gets a little slower. It's like, how do I dribble this? What do I do? There's some anxiety maybe. But if it's freeze tag, you see them just booking it around, like moving way faster, way more fearlessly. Like you aren't having all these extra things in the way that could constrain. So I always always think, well, what games will keep the level of this as high as possible? And then we'll roll out the soccer ball more at the end. And then we'll do more of the soccer-y stuff, versus we're going to work on all the fundamentals right now and learn how to do these 3 things, this way, and just make it boring and, like the lines and all that stuff. And just, so it's a fun way to get that perspective and then balance it with all the other perspectives as we move forward in life and our athletic and movement journey.
Yeah. It's funny. My kid's on flag football now with 5-year-olds, and it's the most amount of waiting he's like had to do. Like you think you get him in an organized sports game, like, oh, something physical to do. Like he'll play and run around outside for hours, just running back and forth. But now it's like in football, he has to wait in line. He has to stand there and wait. It's like the opposite of physical activity. It's training like patience. But it's funny, the coach was like, we got to work on these drills so you guys know how to learn how to get in front of them. So it's like these side shuffling to like get in front. And then they go to play in the game and they all start side shuffling and none of them are like going and pulling the flag. And it's like they took it so literally. Yeah. So yeah, it's like the best thing you could do is just have them play tag and like go after it, because I don't think they can integrate those drills, those isolated pieces into they don't have the concept of that yet. So yeah, it's interesting how you approach that age group.
Yeah, with yeah, not just for the real young age group, but you could do this even all the way to high school, even beyond. It's Powerball. I forget if I was talking about this with Jeremy or Andy Ryland, but like Jeremy Frisch is really he trains all athletes, adult fitness, but a ton of youth stuff. And one of his favorite games for young athletes is Powerball. Basically, it's like the American Gladiators game where you like, you got to run and dunk the ball in the bucket or whatever it is. And he'll have athletes play it with flags on. So they put flags like it's flag football, and there's always one more bucket to guard than there is players. So if you have 6 players, 3 are guarding 4 buckets, and then 3 people are trying to dunk a ball in the bucket. And so you have to kind of play zone defense, but it's all like, you just play, and there's not like a coach necessarily telling you what to do, how to do it. And I set that up in my yard. I actually bought flags just to play that game with my kids. And like they were just laughing their butts off, like running real fast. We don't have a flag. They have to run up the hill and do it. So I guess they're doing hill sprints or whatever. And
Nice.
but and my son calls it fastball. He just named it. He's like, "Hey, you want to play fastball?" And so, but I actually might have the soccer kids do that, because again, I'm just trying to think about things that where it's not like move as fast as possible and have as much fun as possible. And I asked Jeremy about that, Jeremy Frisch, who has this in his course. And I was like, and I watched kids playing this, and I play it myself. And I'm like, I think asked Jeremy, I was like, Jeremy, after you play this game, do you kind of almost look at every sport in light of the intensity in this game? Because I talked about like the intensity of the game, and you relate everything else to that. And for me, I'm starting to look at youth sports. Like everything goes back to how intense and fun is this Powerball game. And if you're soccer, your football, your basketball, how many shades less fun is it than that game? I mean, you have to learn, you do have to learn some level of fundamentals at some point for sure. I think people debate how much play, how much fundamental learning, but I was, that got me thinking about the flag football and the Powerball there. I know our time's kind of running down here a little bit, DJ, but I did want to ask you, I did want to close with this, was, talking about the story of movement. I think you've talked about training for the zombie apocalypse and archetypes too. I think, you got me thinking about what my movement archetype is, like jumping and breakdancing, and, you lift really heavy things and heavy stones, and like what's your movement archetype, and what's your story in how you train, and what drives you with your meaning in your training practice?
Boy, yeah. Pretty simple bro archetype, I would say. I just would like to look jacked, be able to look good, play good, and feel good. I don't know what archetype that is, but yeah, just, lift. If I could be decently strong, dad strong, farm boy strong, look decently good physically, and be decently competent as far as jumping in Powerball or whatever game, and be all right, then yeah, I'm happy. That's kind of my goal.
Yeah.
What archetype would you call that?
I don't know. I was just thinking.
Call the bro archetype. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll have to list these out, because I was like, well, what archetype? If I like jumping and like breakdancing movement stuff, like I don't know what that makes me, but it is interesting, because I know that. I mean, I like, after watching you do the stone lifting, like I would go run in like a creek bed near my house, and there's like these stones at the end of there's this little waterfall. I'm like, I'm going to try to pick these up. This is a lot of fun, and I really like it, but it is something I enjoy doing, but I don't think it's not necessarily my strength, compared to maybe some other things. Not that I don't like doing it, but you got my wheels turned, to say the least, on some of these things. So,
well, Joel, you're the assassin.
All right.
You're who we send out when we need to make a hit under stealth, cover of night.
All right, I'll write that down. The assassin type, and maybe I'll have to write a bunch of these out, and we'll get a list together.
I would love for you to make a side quest on the assassin mission. That would be amazing.
It'd be a good thought experiment too. I think just to not to keep going. My mind will keep going on this forever, but we usually think sets and reps, or even getting into more the art of it. But I think to kind of also have a story, like, oh, this, how would you train this person, and then let your mind run there. How would you train this person? So You have a good set a good thought experiment for me for my day today. I appreciate that.
Imagine a CrossFit class where it's like, okay, WOD of the day is this character or figure, this archetype, and it looks like parkour, and the other one looks like a strongman event. Yeah, that'd be interesting. Even if you could program for that over the year with different archetypes, it's an interesting thought.
Yeah, it is definitely something to keep me busy with. So, well, good stuff, DJ. Hey, I really appreciate you taking the time to be on the show here. Anything you're working on? Any projects or anything that you want to mention before we take off for the day?
Yeah, speaking of that, using your body to load people, we're working on a course called Manual External Constraints, just how to use your hands, how to use your body weight to, just make any movement better for your clients. So yeah, me and Garrett Colgan, G Money Movement, will be releasing that soon.
Very cool. Maybe a few Move Boys videos in relation to it as well, perhaps, or just anything. Those are always good.
Those will also be out. Yeah.
Very cool. All right. Well, thank you again, DJ. I'll definitely be checking that out, and I appreciate you taking the time for our show today.
Yeah. Thank you so much, Joel.
That wraps up another episode of the podcast. Thanks for tuning into this one. If you enjoyed the show, you can leave us a rating or review on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, whatever you're listening to the show on. I'd absolutely appreciate that, and we'll see you next week.